Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Only Podcast. My name is Chris Ranini, your host. And as always, I'm joined by the OnlyColors.com managing editor, Joe Toohey. Joe, we've got a lot to talk about in this podcast here. But I think we're going to have to start off with the biggest news of the past week, which was the Great Lakes Invitational. The hockey team losing 2 games in overtime, blowing 2 third-period leads. I know that's on the top of your mind. How you doing, Joe?
Well, I know that there's certainly some coaches that should be have their jobs considered, right? Whether that's Tom Anastas or some sections of the fan base that are unhappy with coaches in other sports. But
Right, everybody coast to coast is saying D'Antonio has to be out because he didn't win the national championship. I know that's
right?
that's what you're hearing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Cotton Bowl, ugly game for MSU to say the least. A 38-0 loss that you can debate whether or not the score was indicative of the game, but a lot to talk about this. I thought Lane Kiffin, Alabama offense coordinator, did a great job, great game plan. MSU did what it could. Connor Cook didn't seem to be 100%, but Alabama was just completely overwhelming, and the Spartans were thoroughly outclassed in that game, I think. Joe, you were there. We'll get into your trip in a little bit, but I guess to start off with this game, what do you think? What do you take away?
I mean, I didn't think Jake Coker was that good, and I don't think that MSU's coaching staff necessarily thought he was either. And I think that was the big difference in the game. There were a couple different 50-yard passes to Calvin Ridley, who's the freshman for Alabama that we discussed a little bit on the preview podcast, and he was a bigger impact, had a bigger impact on the game than I think either of us expected. Although we both sort of thought that it was possible. I was surprised that MSU's offensive line was as overwhelmed as it was. And so really the offense couldn't get anything going for the most part, other than, a couple drives that ended up, ending in turnovers or turnovers on downs. So yeah, I mean, what can you say? It was a total shellacking. And it's unfortunate that it happened on the biggest stage that MSU has been on in the last 50 years.
Yeah, it's weird. When we talked last week, there were a couple of questions I had. Some of my biggest factors for the game. One of them was, can they stop the deep ball to Calvin Ridley? They did not. Lane Kiffin knew exactly what he was doing. He suckered MSU in with the short passes to the flats, where MSU was also weak. Hit him with the deep balls. Demetrius Cox burned a few times, and that was that there. Another question, could they protect Connor Cook? Because we didn't think they'd be able to run the ball. They sort of did, sort of didn't. Now, Cook was sacked a number of times, but I think part of that has to be put on there was nobody open. From what I was reading on Pro Football Focus, MSU's blocking was okay, but Cook was in the pocket longer than he normally would be because he couldn't find anybody open, because Alabama just rushed for almost the whole game. That's what they do. And I saw a stat which is insane. Alabama's offensive line, or defensive line, I'm sorry, the front four have 31 sacks, or when they rush 4, they have 31 sacks on the year, which is crazy. And that allows them to drop 7 back every single time. And when MSU was running 3 receivers out there, so maybe 3 or 4 receivers against 7 defensive backs who are all very, very talented, there was just nobody could get open. And when they could get open, they didn't always catch the ball. Burbridge had a bad drop. I think Kings had a bad drop. There were some drops in there that didn't help. And against Alabama, your margin for error is 0. So they had trouble with that. And then special teams. I actually tweeted right before the game. I said, we'll see how their special teams coverages are, because Cyrus Jones has 3 punt returns on the year, and lo and behold, they give up a punt return touchdown. And that's that. I mean, just about every key factor in this game that MSU needed to do, they did not. And that's how you get to what the thing is. And when you look at the game, 38-0 looks bad. There's a couple ways to look at this. It was 10-0. It was 0-0 after 1. It was 10-0 late in the second quarter. But MSU's right there, could get a touchdown, could get a field goal. You go in, make it a 1-score game, and you're probably feeling pretty good, and MSU's looking pretty good. Cook throws that bad interception. They went to the back shoulder throw, I think twice in a row to Burbridge, and the second throw was just not good. Telegraphed it all the way. And then that was that. Alabama comes down to start the ball in the second half. They get a touchdown, which was kind of controversial on whether or not they could overturn it. I know you were not a fan of that. That made it 17-0. Then that was about that. Then it was still, late into the third quarter, 17-0, which not a blowout. MSU wasn't doing much, but it's not a blowout. And then they get the punt return, and then actually a booming kick by Hartbarger, but it was low. Nobody was there to cover because it was such a quick kick and punt return touchdown. That's that, and that was the game after that. And yeah, they got shut out, and the shutout stats are kind of arbitrary because MSU was right down there in field goal range twice. They could have kicked a field goal if they wanted to break the shutout deal. Iowa sort of did that against Stanford, kicking a field goal down 38-0 or something like that. So I don't know. That's kind of my whole, a lot of factors on what MSU had to do. They couldn't do any of them. And I don't know. What do you think of all that I just said?
Yeah, there were a couple things I thought similarly about. One of the things I thought was going to be really important was MSU's ability to finish drives that got down inside the 40, and they scored a whopping 0 points on the 3 drives, and they only got 3 drives inside of Alabama's 40. So
2 of those were late. Were 2 of those late too?
Yeah, that resulted in turnovers and downs. Yeah. And Alabama averaged 6 points per trip inside the 40. There was that 1 field goal, but other than that, they scored touchdowns. So that, to me, that was an area that MSU kind of had to win in order for them to have a chance in this game, because that was an area based on the rest of the season that MSU had an advantage in. Then the other thing was turnovers. It turns out that fumble by Jake Coker early on that just went out of bounds was huge, because had MSU been able to recover that ball, they're already in field goal range there. So that was part of it. But on the game, turnover luck actually sort of turns out neutral, because MSU had a couple fumbles that they didn't end up recovering. You could argue that those fumbles weren't as important at the time when they happened, which was later in the game. But so they didn't win field position, and they also didn't win field position, which I kind of figured would happen just based on the efficiency of Alabama's offense and defense. But most importantly, that finishing drives and turnovers were areas that I thought MSU had a chance at having advantages that could keep them in the game or win them the game, and you pretty much couldn't get worse in the finishing drives category.
Offensively. Well, let's talk about this here. I don't know if it would have made a huge difference, but 4 drives to start, 4 different running backs. Just, I don't like that. We didn't like that all year. I don't really know if it would have made a difference because it's Alabama and how well they stopped the run. But for LJ Scott and Gerald Holmes, who I think have established themselves as the top backs, for them to get a total of 6 carries for Scott, 2 for Holmes, that's not good. The other side of that, there weren't a whole lot of carries to be had. MSU only ran 65 total plays, but a lot of those they only had not a lot in the first, but 65 even on its own is not a lot. And then you're down and you got to start passing. So I didn't like the running back plan going into the game. I don't know if it would have made a huge difference, but that's something going into next year I think they're going to have to figure out whether, maybe guys transfer, I don't know, because of how many guys there are, but they can't be doing 4 drives with 4 running backs, and that's something they've done all year too. So I don't know. What do you think of I guess your quick thoughts on that. I don't know if it really made a big difference, but
Yeah, I didn't think it made a huge difference. So it was the fewest rushing attempts that MSU had all season, partially because they got down when they got down. And yeah, I mean, I didn't think that any of those running backs individually was doing a significantly better job than any of the others. So I guess I sort of understand the concept of rotating through them just to see, who might sort of figure something out. And none of them did because, there's just nothing to be had in the running game. They averaged 2.6 yards per carry. I thought that, if they had gotten to 3.5 yards per carry, that would have been pretty good, but they were well short of that. So yeah, going into next year, it'll be really interesting to see. I mean, there's a couple interesting things there, right? So Delton Williams has never redshirted, so he could transfer and use his redshirt year and have 2 years of eligibility left somewhere else.
yeah.
And the rest of those guys are all real young, so it'll be very interesting. And I think if I'm Madre London or LJ Scott or Gerald Holmes, I feel pretty good about my ability probably to win some playing time next year. So that's absolutely an interesting thing, but it could also just be a huge strength of the team, if they're able to play a couple running backs at a time. And I could see the offensive staff getting creative in using all of those running backs. That could be a strength in some sense as well.
Yeah, let's talk about that. You mentioned at the top the offensive staff. Dave Warner is the running backs coach. I believe he should be the guy then who decides which running backs go in. He was criticized coming out of this game. He's been criticized at times this year, but that comes with being an offensive coordinator. Of all the criticisms, I think were fair. Or of all the criticisms, one I think was fair was far too often running the ball on first down, especially in a game like this when you knew you weren't going to run the ball. There was one play, I can't recall. They got a penalty, and I think it was a 1st and 15 or a 1st and 20 on like a fall after a run went nowhere, and they did a run again that went nowhere. It was just like a waste of a play. And I remember leading into the Michigan game, Ace Sandbender from MGold Blog had broken down MSU's formations, and basically on first down, when they're under center, they run, and when they're in shotgun, they pass. It was very, very predictable, is what he said. And you can only imagine what opponents think of that. So I think the runs on first down in a game where you're not running the ball and you're not going to be able to run the ball, I think we're not advised. But I don't know how much they were going to do in Alabama. I think he could have had a better game. The Wildcat with Burbridge, get that out. Just get that out of the offense. It's not 2007. Wildcat is not a thing. Stanford's the only team I've seen still do it that has any sort of success, and that's because they have a behemoth offensive line that can do whatever they want, and MSU doesn't. But the idea of making a coaching change, like, no. A year ago,
right? Yeah, I'm with you.
A year ago, they broke every single offensive record in the book for this team. They finished in the top 10 scoring. They scored 40 points a game. Just no. I mean, they're breaking in all new receivers this year. Just no, none of they just no.
Yeah, well, okay. So I actually wrote a post about this. It's going up on Friday, but
okay, I can read that, people, when it comes up.
Yeah, I mean, so I ran this poll on the Only Colors Twitter account about whether or not MSU should look for a new offensive coordinator. 35% of people said that they should look for a new offensive coordinator. That's absolutely ridiculous.
That's actually lower than what I would have expected for a Twitter poll.
Well, and what I'll say there too is that the people who are upset about the offensive coordinating in general probably are the loudest in the comment sections of stuff. But
that's how it goes.
But at the same time, like, are we really that spoiled already? I mean, Warner and Bowman got handed an offense that was in total shambles, that had no clear quarterback, that had no clear running back, that had no receivers that could do anything. They turned that offense into what turned out to be a top 35 in terms of advanced stats offense in 2013 and won the Rose Bowl doing it. They developed Conklin and Lippett and Fowler and Cook and all these guys that turned into NFL players, not to mention Burbridge. I mean, it's insane to talk about looking for a new offensive coordinator. I mean, there's room to improve, absolutely. Like, there are these things, right? Running the ball on first down, the tight end around against Nebraska. Like, there's things that can be questioned, absolutely. But, like, you know, you write for a coaching search website. Like, they're not all home run hires, number one. And number two, like, if you're going to bet on a couple of guys, I would bet on the guys that gave you your best offense in school history, right? I mean, it's wild.
And not to mention, they don't get paid that much either. For what Warner and them did last year, you can make the case that they are underpaid. And MSU is kind of on the lower end of assistant salaries when you look at the big schools. So even if that was the case, I don't even know what or who they would be able to bring in. But no, like you said, D'Antonio's always been about continuity, and he's made a change when it hasn't worked with Dan Rusho. That obviously didn't work out, and he made a change and it worked. You know, this game specifically, it's Alabama, and it's very hard for anybody to do anything in Alabama. So, just
well, not only that, but like it's one game too, right?
I mean,
much larger sample size to look at, anyways.
Well, like, I mean, the idea that the offense was predictable at times this year, that's true. But you know, no offensive coordinator is going to be perfect. And don't forget, these guys scrapped together a game plan to win, to beat Ohio State at Ohio State with Tyler O'Connor at quarterback. The option game, that was tremendous coaching game plan that they did. And actually, we can talk about next year a little bit later, but that's something I'm curious if they will do more of moving forward, considering the skills of the players who will be coming back. But yeah, so no, not making a change there. But so yeah, that's that. Defensively now, last thing on offense. On the offensive line, Jack Conklin, from all accounts, did very well in that game, and as he has since declared for the NFL draft, I imagine he set himself up pretty good with how he did against the Tide. It was the right side of the line that was the big problem. Right tackle Cody Keeler did not have a good day. There was a vine going around of a guy making a spin move on him and dumping him down. And but from what I understand, Keeler was actually quite banged up physically heading into that game. So you can kind of understand it, but not. Offensive line, like I said at the beginning, kind of good, kind of bad. They weren't terrible, but when nobody was open downfield, you can't protect for forever. So that's just my only thoughts on the line. Not much to say there. But so defensively now, you're going into this game, you think, stop Derrick Henry, you give yourself a chance. They stopped Derrick Henry. I thought the run defense I'll say this. That was one of my questions going in that MSU did succeed at. The linebackers made the tackles. I was worried about, you know, Henry's power against MSU's smaller linebackers, and they stood their ground. They did a very good job in that aspect. The problem was Lane Kiffin knew exactly how to attack this MSU defense, and that's what passes into the flats, and that's what passes deep, and that's what they did. And MSU's defensive backfield, which we said it was a question at the beginning of the year, it was a problem all year. They had injuries. They got burned pretty badly in the passing game. What do you think of the defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the game plan was sort of what we expected, where they ratcheted up the aggressiveness to some degree, and you know, the trade-off there is sort of leaving the defensive backs not necessarily on an island, but often on an island on the back end, and you can't really fault them for that strategy, considering just how efficient Derrick Henry is. And you know, we say that MSU stopped him. He ended up with 3.8 yards per carry, which is one of his worst outings of the season, but at the same time is not terrible. So yeah, I mean, they implemented the strategy that you would think would work, and that didn't work, right? There's the other thing that was a little unfortunate to me was just how little RJ Williamson mattered in this game. I thought that he might be a positive. coming back from injury. And I mean, it makes sense that you're not going to be 100% coming back from an injury like a torn biceps, and be able to contribute in a huge fashion. I mean, he had a couple plays in the nickel package, but other than that, that was too bad. That was sort of my hope for the secondary, was that RJ Williamson would make a difference. Yeah, other than that, I don't have a whole lot. I think I remember the first drive that Alabama scored on, that touchdown that Alabama scored, I thought, boy, that's, Jake Coker just looked awesome. There's no way he's going to look that good for the whole game. And I was very much wrong. So, yeah, I mean,
he played well.
Sometimes you just get the absolute best game from a guy. I mean, that's his career high in passing yards, and absolutely the best game he's ever played in his career. And it's hard to say too much more about the defense on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, again, going into next year, I'm curious if they tweak this, if they tweak the defense at all, because they don't have the defensive backs that they used to. They can't, against the good teams, they can't leave their safeties on an island all day. Cox, athletic guy, but man, he was just burned time after time after time this year. When he's matched up with a wide receiver in the slot, the deep ball is always there on him. And it did hurt not having Vayante Copeland, whom the coaches have raved about quite a bit. He'll be back next year as a sophomore. You'll have Darian Hicks back, presumably healthy finally, for a good go around. You'll have Cox back. You'll have Nicholson back. So there's some talent there in the backfield. It's still a little thin, but I'm curious to see if they try to tweak this defense at all a little bit more to make up for those defensive back deficiencies, because as we saw at a number of times this year, that they could not, against the good receivers. The guy from Rutgers comes to mind. They could not cover very well.
Yeah, well, I thought that there were a couple interesting things over the course of the season there, right? So one is that Monte Nicholson had a bumpy year in a bunch of different ways.
A lot of lows. A lot of lows. He got better toward the end of the year.
Right. I thought he had a great game against Ohio State, but yeah, so that was an interesting thing. The other interesting thing was starting a couple true freshman safeties for a number of games in there as well, and then having some true freshman corners play, and Monty Medeiros flipping over and playing corner as well. So the thing I'm happy about is that it seems like there's some safety depth now with Kari Willis and Grayson Miller having played pretty significant time on pretty big stages.
Yeah.
So that's good. And then the other thing is that I don't think, barring additional injury, I don't think that the secondary will get shuffled around the way that it did this year as well. I mean, I think that had Cox been playing safety all year, that he might have been a little bit more effective than switching back and forth between corner and safety. So that's my hope. My hope there is just that having full-time guys playing at their correct positions and a little bit more depth will allow the secondary to be a little bit better. But to your point about tweaking the defense, it seemed to me like the secondary was tweaked in many games this season. I mean, it seemed clear to me that they weren't playing the same type of bump and run coverage.
Well, that's
they're still playing cover 4, but it was not as aggressive in a lot of ways. So I mean,
right. That's something I noticed all year. They what they did when they would play the defensive backs close to the line, they wouldn't bump like at all. That we've talked about this. I'm assuming that's what's being coached, but I just don't understand it unless you don't think these guys are at all physical enough to handle any receivers. But the comeback routes were open all year because guys were able to run unimpeded. Really, I mean, MSU's defensive backs were essentially asked to just out athletic guys and to be in position. There was the bump and run is real strange, and I know you'd watch any game and you'd see when they would play tight on guys, just like there's not an attempt to be physical. So I'm not totally sure what was up with that, but
Well, and they also just didn't play guys, up close as much as they did when Waynes and Denard were around. So I think a lot of it has to do with quality of corner, but I also think D'Antonio makes comments all the time about win is a win, whether you win 42-41 or 7-6. A win is a win, and so I think that, and I appreciate that thought process, because to me it seems like he's done a good job of recognizing the strengths of his various teams and playing to those strengths. So I think his thought this season was that the offense was going to carry the load for the most part. And, against Oregon, they were able to limit big plays. And I sort of thought that they'd turned a corner in being able to do stuff like that. That came back and bit them in this Cotton Bowl. But I do appreciate D'Antonio's just realistic approach to, here's what we do well, here's how we're going to augment what it is that we do well, and ends up winning games because of it. So
the injuries were certainly a factor with guys changing positions by the game. I mean, to go into Michigan and some guys, but some guys struggling to start two true freshmen at Michigan. I still look back in that and cannot believe it, and cannot believe Michigan did not attack them downfield with that. But the defense, I think, the defense will be the strength next year. I think they lose Calhoun and Thomas, but Demetrius Cooper has done well in the backup role for Calhoun. The linebackers will be talented. Ed Davis presumably will come back. If he does, that's a big boost. Copeland will be back in the defensive backfield. So defense, I think, will be kind of what leads them. And I guess before we get to your trip, we'll talk a little bit about next year. So defensively, like I said, they're returning a good chunk of the front seven or getting some guys back. They should be a little bit better in the defensive backfield. Not a whole ton better defense, but this was still a pretty good defense. I know the standard for MSU defense has become, top 5, number 1 defense. It should be pretty good next year, I think. Offensively is where we get all the questions. New quarterback, new receivers, new couple of guys on the line, but they do have all those running backs. So I mentioned it a few minutes ago. I'm very curious to see what they're going to do offensively, because the Ohio State game, it wouldn't be exciting, but the Ohio State game plan, the option offense, it really worked. Whether it was with O'Connor or whether it was with Terry, they've got guys who can move their feet, and you'd want to take advantage of that. Especially with all the question marks at receiver, what do you think about the offense next year?
Yeah, so the offensive line is to me one of the bigger questions as well. Conklin declaring today for the NFL draft, and then losing Jack Allen and Donovan Clark as well. The good news is that they played enough guys along the offensive line this year that there should be a decent number of guys who have had some starting experience there, and every team loses some stuff along the offensive line. But so the quarterback competition will be really interesting. And, I wasn't all that impressed with Damian Terry as a runner. I actually thought that Tyler O'Connor in some ways in that Ohio State game was a little bit more dynamic as an option quarterback. He just seemed a little more slippery. But, I really can't imagine that an option offense will be anything more than a situational thing for an MSU offense. I think that it's going to be sort of the same kind of stuff, right? It'll be a multiple offense. They'll run out of the shotgun a fair amount. I think that Josiah Price probably has to become a larger part of the offense just because he's one of the most experienced receivers on the team. Yeah. We saw when Brian Linthicum was a senior that he played off the line sort of as a receiver in a lot of games, and I think we'll see more of that out of Josiah Price since he's such a good pass catcher. So there's a good amount of depth still at tight end, even though Paul Lang will be leaving. But with Jamal Wiles and Josiah Price, there's a couple good tight ends. I was glad to see that Felton Davis played some during the Cotton Bowl as well.
Right. Let me on that play. That was a great call by Dave Warner. I'll point that out. To hurry it up, to catch Alabama off guard, to catch that big gain to Felton Davis, which I think was their biggest play of the game. But that was just a head up play by them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of question marks without Connor Cook being around. And, who ends up winning that quarterback competition will be sort of the biggest storyline of the whole offseason. But I don't think that there's such a talent deficiency in a bunch of areas that they can't sort of run the offense that they normally want to run. They might need to emphasize certain parts of the team more than others. But, yeah, then the other thing is that it'll be interesting. We've seen in years where there have been a lot of senior receivers who have left, the year after that tends to be a little bit rough. So 2008, when BJ Cunningham and Mark Dell and Keyshawn Martin were all freshmen, the offense took a step back. In 2012, when it was Benny Fowler and
Lippin and Humphrey
and Kings.
They burned Kings' red shirt because they needed somebody.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's why he won't be back next year. That year was rough too. So it'll be interesting to see if they can sort of break that pattern with the guys that they've got. I mean, RJ Shelton has been sort of an all-purpose back in some ways, a lot of running out of the backfield, but he's made some great catches as well. So, it'll just be very interesting with the way that they flip Monty Medeiros to the defense. It'll be interesting to see if he can flip back around and play at receiver. It seems like he'd be more useful at receiver this season.
I mean, yeah.
So
I mean, D'Antonio said that the true freshmen are going to have a chance to play, which has to be pretty scary, I think, if you're MSU, because you're going to have an somewhat inexperienced quarterback throwing to him. And I mean, what do you lean any way on this quarterback battle? Do you lean toward O'Connor with his experience? Do you lean toward Terry for the potential?
No, I don't. I was going to be cheeky and say that I lean towards Lewerke, but I don't know. I don't think that either one of them has separated themselves in any particular fashion. I mean, we've seen small sample size stuff from both guys, and both from the use of their legs and also throwing the ball. So, I mean, I think both have the tools to be successful Big Ten quarterbacks. Whether that's just from a physical standpoint, I think both of them could be successful. And they've both been in the program for quite a while now. So I think that whoever wins that battle, and I like that there is a battle, I think that helps to some degree. But
yeah, I think
whoever wins that battle is going to be a pretty good quarterback, really.
Yeah, years that they had a battle were 2009 when both quarterbacks did very well in that battle. And that worked out. And then a battle in 2013, which was ugly at the beginning, but did work out in finding somebody. I think O'Connor, at least right now, O'Connor clearly has the edge. He's been the number 2 guy all year, and he won the game. He won at Ohio State. Terry was in there for a few plays, but O'Connor was picking up that fourth down run. He's the one who threw the touchdown pass. A big part of that was the running backs, but he does have a hell of a win on his resume. Not that QB wins are a stat, but he did perform well in an extremely tough situation. So I think he's got the edge going in. Curious, like I said, I'm curious to see what they. I don't really know what way they'll go. So, but so it's next season. Spring football is just a few months away, so not that long. But so let's go back to this Cotton Bowl here. Now, you went to Dallas. How was your trip?
It was pretty good. I got to stay for a little while longer than I did last year. Last year, I flew in on New Year's Eve. The game was on the 1st last year, and then flew out on the 2nd. So I didn't really do anything in Dallas. So I actually got to do some Dallas things. I went to the JFK Museum, the 6th floor museum where Lee Harvey Oswald shot him. Got to engage in some conspiracy theorizing while I was there. And after watching, just as an aside, going to the JFK Museum after watching Making a Murderer will really foul your taste for the government just in general. But
I can't say I've seen it, but I've heard many
yeah.
good things.
So anyways, though, no, it was a pretty good trip. What I'll say is that Alabama fans were less obnoxious than I expected. I really only had like one person who was rubbing the win in my face after the game. But other than that, they were like pretty reasonable. I was sitting in an Alabama section actually, and nobody called me out or was an asshole or anything like that. So I appreciated that pretty significantly. I was very impressed at our fan base and how MSU fans traveled to this game.
I was going to ask you that. How did it look?
It looked very good from where I was seated. It was kind of hard to see. So I was in the corner. So in the end zone where MSU's band was, there was the corner of the band. I'm in the same end zone, but the other side, which is where Alabama fans were. But it's kind of hard for me to see the other corner just because the giant screen is there. But from what I could tell, it might have been, at worst, it was 60-40 for Alabama. I think it was more like 55-45 for Alabama. But, after going to that 2013 Big Ten championship game,
yeah,
that's pretty good considering how much travel there is to Dallas and the fact that we were in the Cotton Bowl last year. That was, it was really good to see. And actually, I noticed on Facebook this week after the game that I had a lot of like friends that, sort of Facebook friends, not close friends, that had gone to the game that I had no idea were there, which kind of makes sense. But yeah, overall, the weather was better too. Last year it was raining outside, so tailgating was tough last year. It was a little easier this year. It was a great atmosphere for the game in general. It much different than the Cotton Bowl to start 2015. So it was a good trip.
It was hard to tell on TV the divide because it was dark outside compared to a year ago when it was light outside, and MSU fans were green, so it's kind of difficult to see the green relative to that. So sounds like a good deal. Seemed fun. How's the you say you did went to the Cotton Bowl, right? So you've been to that stadium before.
Yeah, there's a couple things about that stadium that I still don't like. They still do you're not allowed to walk through certain parts of the concourse, the main concourse. It's not as big of a deal in the upper deck. Actually, you can walk around the upper deck concourse without any problems. So that was a little bit better. But yeah, other than the giant screen, which you don't really watch during the course of the game very much, unless there's a review or something.
I was going to ask if it was distracting at all.
I don't find it distracting. I could understand why some people might. It is extremely bright, especially at night when this game was going on. So yeah. Oh, the only bad thing was that I was in a car driving when it struck midnight. The game actually happened a lot quicker than I expected, probably just because it was such a blowout that both teams were just kind of running clock, or at least Alabama was for the most part. So it was a faster game than I expected. I thought that we might get to where we were going for New Year's, but I was in a car on the highway as clock struck midnight. But that was sort of the only downer of the trip, and that's not that big of a deal really. Yep.
So that'll do it for the 2015 Michigan State football season. A fifth win season of at least 11 wins, fifth time in 6 years. Now, where do you think they end up ranked? They came into this number 3. They got their asses handed to them. Ohio State finished strong. Stanford finished strong. Do you think MSU can remain in the top 5? There's also Oklahoma there too.
I think probably not. I mean, at this point, I think it would be hard to rank MSU above Stanford. And yeah, I mean, it's tough because that loss really, the way that loss happened really kind of clouds things. For, you compare MSU's resume to Oklahoma's, and it's a tough thing because Oklahoma's wins against top Big 12 teams came when those Big 12 teams had injured quarterbacks.
Yeah.
So that's a tough thing, and both teams have a relatively bad loss. But Oklahoma's loss to Clemson was a lot closer, so that's a tough one. I think, yeah. Here's the other thing, right? They'll end up in the top 10. I think they'll be between 5 and 10.
Yeah. I mean, but here's the thing. I mean, should Ohio State be ranked higher than them?
That's a tough question. Ohio State does only have one loss, and their one loss is a quality loss. So,
I mean, this is the thing. Like, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, Ohio State's a better team." Well, yeah, but they lost. They lost to Michigan State with their backup quarterback. Like, we can say who's better, but in the end, this comes down to winning and losing. And MSU won that game at Ohio State without their quarterback. I think Ohio State is going to finish ranked higher than MSU. I don't think they should, but they will.
Yeah, I think they will too, and I think it's just a perception of Ohio State and their brand, but also lack of a second loss. So
Ohio State played 2 good games this year. They against Michigan and against Notre Dame. They finally turned that switch on, but they did not look good for the first 11 games of the season, including that loss to Michigan State. They almost lost to Indiana. Northern Illinois battled them tough. And MSU went through those same deals with tough games against Purdue and Rutgers. So, we talked about all year about how those teams didn't look very good together. And then, I mean, to me, it just comes down to, their resumes are pretty similar, but MSU beat them, so I'd put MSU there. I don't think MSU is going to be there. I think MSU is going to drop to 6 behind getting jumped by Stanford, Ohio State, and Oklahoma. I don't know if there's anybody behind them that would make a case. I don't even know who was ranked number 7, but I'm going to guess they're going to finish number 6.
Sure. Yeah, 6 sounds right to me.
Yeah, let me look up who number 7 was here. Yeah, because I know, Florida. I know. Yeah, let's. No, not the playoff picture. I'm clicking on it.
Well, here's the other thing.
I know how Florida.
The other thing that'll be interesting about Ohio State is that game in East Lansing next year, and MSU's home schedule next season is wild. I mean.
Yeah, well, okay. Just like, Iowa is number 5. They'll be ahead of Iowa. And then Notre Dame's 8, Florida State 9. So I think 6 is the lowest they'll be. I think they'll end up at 6. Jump by Oklahoma, Stanford, and
Ohio State.
Yeah. So I mean, okay, but yeah, back next year, home schedule: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio State, and they go to
Northwestern.
Okay, and Northwestern, and they go
BYU.
Oh yeah, I was looking at the schedule the other day. I was like, BYU. I totally forgot about that. It's weird.
I am so excited to tailgate around BYU fans. I think that they will be horrified.
Well, I imagine the fans that travel will have been to some similar environments. But okay, the schedule next year. They start off with Furman, 1AA, then they get a bye, and then they play at Notre Dame as part of 11 straight games to go through the year, which is going to be very difficult to not have that bye. They're essentially playing their whole season in a row. I'm imagining Furman will not be very difficult. So they'll be going full go for 11 straight weeks, which I think will be very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, if you thought that MSU had injury difficulties this season, next season might be worse.
Yeah, I mean, there are questions about this team, but like I said, other than Notre Dame, they do get all their tough Big Ten games at home, and with Notre Dame and Ohio State, I mean, Ohio State's lost 8 or 9 guys early to the NFL, including Joey Bosa and the like. And Notre Dame has also lost Will Fuller, their big play receiver, who had originally said he was going to come back. They also lost Kavari Russell. So some questions on those powerhouse teams that MSU will play next year. MSU has its own question. I think Michigan is going to. Michigan may be the favorite in the Big Ten. Michigan or Iowa might be coming into the season just because of what they bring back. Obviously, they'll have to figure out a quarterback deal, and we'll see how that goes in the spring. But they bring a good chunk of their playmakers back. Michigan does. The problem for Michigan though is they also have they essentially have a 3-game season next year. They play at MSU, they play at Ohio State, and they play at Iowa. So 9-3. If you look at what they did this year, they finished 9-3. It was a pretty good. I mean, from what they were, big improvement. But the schedule was not too difficult, and they lost 3 of the most difficult games. And next year, it's going to be kind of a similar deal where they play at MSU, at Iowa, at Ohio State, all in the final 5 games. So, I mean, do you think Michigan's the favorite going in? Do you think it's Ohio State based on being Ohio State?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think you would really probably struggle to pick Michigan just because of their schedule difficulty within the Big Ten. I didn't realize they played at Iowa as well. I knew they played at MSU and at Ohio State. I don't know. So it'll be weird because coming into this season, it was Ohio State was a clear favorite, and then MSU was a clear number 2, and then it was like, well, who knows who comes out of the West, and then Michigan might be kind of good. And so this year, though, I think it'll just be a more open field, I guess. Yeah, if I would really struggle to pick, because it seems like all of the teams have pretty significant deficiencies in one area or another. For Michigan, it's I think that their front 7, they lose a lot out of their front 7, and their schedule is quite difficult. For Ohio State, it's that they have basically an entirely new team. For MSU, it's a new quarterback and a fair amount of turnover on offense, but a pretty favorable schedule in terms of who they get at home. And then, yeah, I mean, Iowa will definitely be a contender, but you got to wonder, like, when you make a 1-year turnaround like they did from 1 year to the next, it can sometimes be difficult to sustain that level of success for a second year in a row. So that'll be interesting too. And then Northwestern's sort of an interesting team in there as well, just because they were a lot better than I expected them to be this year, and they could be somewhat competitive. And Wisconsin's always around, so I think it's just going to be a pretty wide open Big Ten field.
Yeah. So basketball now. Give me your thoughts on the state of the basketball team right now. Obviously, Valentine's still out. They lost to Iowa. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that the loss to Iowa was unsurprising. I thought that was going to be a competitive game with Denzel Valentine, just because Iowa City's a tough place to play. Iowa's got a pretty good team and have been playing especially well. So the loss was unsurprising. It was too bad that it was a little bit of a blowout. But the win against Minnesota, I thought, was encouraging to some degree. Minnesota's bad, but to win a game on the road without Denzel Valentine in Big Ten play is great. I mean, the narrative seemed to be MSU survived a scare. I'm not sure I would call it a scare when it was an 8-point win, but
it was a scare.
I wasn't scared. I don't know. Like, were you? As an MSU fan, like, there was no point during that game where I was like, "Oh no, we're going to lose to Minnesota." Like, I wasn't scared. I don't know. Maybe that's just me being a blatant homer, but I don't know. I wasn't particularly concerned about that game at any point. So I don't know. It's a Big Ten win, and without your star player, I feel like it was pretty decent. I'm encouraged by the development of Bryn Forbes and Aaron Harris both. I think that Aaron Harris is starting to get a better feel for when he needs to just operate within the flow of the offense and get what comes to him within the flow, and when he needs to sort of assert himself and create offense. It's been a little bit of a struggle, and he still fouls too much, but I've been encouraged by those two guys, and I think that the time without Valentine and how it has helped those two guys will benefit the team in the long run. My biggest concern about this team is the power forward position, because since basically Draymond Green's sophomore year in 2010, that power forward position's been played by sort of unique players, whether it was Draymond Green or Brandon Dawson. There was a time in there where Payne was playing the 4 for pretty significant stretches next to Nix, but for the most part, it's been Green or Brandon Dawson. And what those guys brought to the table was elite rebounding and also the ability to defend both the smaller power forwards that you sometimes see in college basketball and also the bigger guys as well. And they both, though their offensive games were totally different, brought a pretty large number of possessions in terms of their usage to the table offensively. Now, this MSU team doesn't have a guy like that. I mean, I think we thought that Javon Bess or Marvin Clark could kind of fill that role, but it seems like Bess struggles with the bigger guys, and it seems like Marvin Clark isn't quite the defender that we hoped he might be, given just how strong he is, really.
Mm-hmm.
Both those guys seem like they're kind of perimeter players that don't really have, what it's going to take to play power forward in Big Ten play, unless opponents go small or something like that. So that's my biggest concern here, because if you play, there's 3 guys who are obviously quality in Schilling, Costello, and Deonta Davis, and then there's Kenny Goins, who's still sort of a question mark. He seems like the type of guy who can sort of fill a lot of what I just talked about, defensive versatility and rebounding, but it'll be really interesting to see sort of how all of that plays out, because I'm not sure that playing those 3 guys, playing Davis, Costello, and Schilling at center and power forward for long stretches is totally the answer. But overall, I mean, I'm relatively encouraged. There's questions about this team still, but I'm hoping for a good game tomorrow, and the Illinois game, which is on the 7th. That'll be interesting to see sort of how that power forward position plays itself out over the course of the year.
Yeah, by the time you listen to this, the game against Illinois may have already happened, depending on when you listen to this. But I mean, I described the game against Minnesota as a strong effort, and so some Michigan fans thought I was being a homer or something, but it wasn't a strong performance. But I just thought it was a strong effort, because I thought Minnesota, like, they're not good, but they, every single time MSU looked like it might make a run, they answered throughout the whole game. They kept that thing close. Anytime MSU, I thought relative to that, and then on the road without Valentine, I thought it was a strong effort. It was one of those, you just kind of you get out of win. It was a difficult game because they didn't play well, but they still pulled it out. I think that was worth something. And I want to ask you a couple of things about the big men that have drawn some headlines. Deonta Davis, defense has been questioned by Izzo. The 3-pointer out of the timeout by Minnesota toward the end comes to mind, but he's a shot blocking machine. You seem, based on your Twitter comments, you seem to be in favor of him playing more than he has. Is that right?
That's a tough one. I think that the way that he impacts the game defensively is pretty significant. I'd be, it's a really tough. It's tough to see the analysis on this. I'd be interested to see how MSU rebounds the ball when he is on the floor, because it seems to me like, so based on his rebounding percentages, he doesn't do as good of a job on the defensive end as he does the offensive end. And my guess on why that happens is that he is trying to block a lot of shots on the defensive end and sort of allows his man to get rebounds. So I'd be interested to see how that works out from a just while he's on the floor perspective. Nobody has the data to do that, unfortunately. So it's interesting to see that happen, because I think that that is what Tom Izzo is talking about, right? He's talking about that Davis needs to understand when he should be going for blocks and when he should be boxing out his guy.
Right.
Part of the issue there is that the guards have been letting guys drive on them, letting slashers get past them. And so, in those situations, you're sort of in a bad situation either way. So to me, the question of Davis's defense and the question of whether or not he should be playing more are two different things to some degree, just because I do think that Costello and Schilling have both been, and Schilling, we've had a little bit less time to see him, but I think they've both been very good. And so, I don't know, when you've got three big men and they all bring something different, it's kind of hard to say one of these three guys should be playing more than the other unless they're playing at the same time, and then that introduces other problems.
Yeah.
So
the other so the other big guy who you don't seem to be high on, I think it was you who you don't seem to be high on, is Kenny Goins. Am I correct?
So yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to hedge here a little bit just because I think that he's been a lot better than I ever expected him to be. The fact that he is a playable piece on this team, even at the end of the bench, is a lot more than I expected, and he's been a very good rebounder. But his offensive upside, if it's there, I haven't seen much of it. I mean, he hit a jumper once, but other than that, I don't see a whole lot of offensive upside from him just yet.
Yeah, I mean, he has a limited role. He's only used on 14% of possessions on KenPom, but his defensive rebound percentage leads the team 25%, almost 26%, and his offensive rebounding is 12%, which is also pretty good. Actually, what's interesting is that Denzel Valentine was MSU's best rebounder, and that's something they have missed without him is the rebounding and the defense have not been as sharp without him. So I mean, everybody looks at what he puts up offensively, but I think it's other areas where they're really missing him. But with Goins, MSU's best lineup at times seems to be Nairn, Forbes, Harris, Goins, and Costello. That was the lineup that made the comeback against Oakland. That was the lineup that did okay against Iowa until there were fouls and it kind of got split up. And then Izzo kind of went with a two big man deal. But I think that lineup has been pretty good for them. In a lineup like that, Goins is the fourth scoring option, or fifth. I mean, but behind Forbes, Harris, and Costello. So I think that fits. It's when he's out there with lineups where one of Forbes or Harris isn't on the floor and maybe Schilling is your big man. It's when they don't have the scoring lineups that it really gets noticeable. But when they've got a couple scorers out there, I think he has fit in there pretty well, and he's kind of provided a good all-around game that I think Izzo's been wanting to see from some of the big men. And Costello against Minnesota, really good. One of his best games of his career. I don't have the stats in front of me, but he's really starting to develop. It's kind of weird to say because he's a senior, but he's got a decent low post game going, and I'm curious to see how much they use that when Valentine comes back, because he's shown some good touch around the rim that he has kind of lacked in his previous years. What do you think about Costello right now offensively?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a couple things there. Between Costello and Deonta Davis, both, I think they've both been pretty good at it. And Schilling flashed that against Minnesota, at least briefly in the first half. But I think it's a useful piece of the offense for a couple reasons. One is that it's more predictable in terms of the outcome of those possessions to some degree. So if you've got a 3-point shooting oriented team, you can go hot and cold there's a lot more variance in terms of, how good you might end up doing or how poorly you might end up doing based on your 3-point shooting. Seems a little bit more random. Whereas being able to just kind of throw the ball down into the post is something where you have a little bit more control. There's a little less variance. I think on average, it's probably a worse possession than shooting an open three, but you get a lot of value in terms of how predictable it is. So it's like passing the ball versus running the ball in football, right? Passing the ball has a much higher upside, but it's a lot more variant because an incomplete pass is bad. Whereas running the ball, there's less upside. There are fewer big plays when running the ball, but it's a lot more consistent in terms of picking up at least a few yards.
Yeah.
So I think, and I think using a football analogy is probably pretty appropriate when Tom Izzo's your head coach. I think that they'll look at that, and I think that they'll do that a good amount, especially as Deonta Davis comes along and plays a little bit more, and especially if they're playing two bigs, because then you get potentially mismatches in the post against smaller power forwards, depending. So that's been encouraging, and I sort of expect to see more of it. The one thing that's been surprising, and you had pointed this out before, is just that Costello isn't consistently shooting threes yet, and I kind of expected to see him. And one of the things I sort of was hoping we might see is Costello playing the 4. To me, it seems like there's probably a fair amount of upside in playing Costello at the 4 and then Schilling or Davis at the 5.
I think the issue with the two big men in that situation, the issue is the fouls. I don't know if any of them are good enough to cover the 4, and they already are. They are having foul trouble, so that's why it was surprising with the two big lineup against Minnesota. So I guess we'll see what happens against Illinois. And Denzel Valentine says he hopes to be back by Sunday against Penn State, which would be important because Iowa is next Thursday. And as we kind of look at how the Big Ten schedule shapes up, the next handful of games until Maryland on January 23rd, when College Game Day will be in town. But the next 4 games are all winnable, but some of them are difficult. They have to play at Penn State, they have home against Iowa, they have at Wisconsin. KenPom has them at least 68% on all 4 of the next games. But I think some of those will be difficult, and I think Valentine coming back will obviously be a big factor in that. But I guess how much has Valentine? I mean, do you think the team has? Do you think they've made steps without him?
Yes. I think that. We talked a little bit about it with Aaron Harris. I think Aaron Harris has been better.
I'm sorry to jump in. He has looked a lot. I just want to get on this while you're talking about Harris. He's looked a lot more confident since the Oakland game, since that second half. He no longer doesn't look like he's worried to screw up or doesn't know what he's doing. Defensively, still have problems, but offensively, he is starting offense. He's driving to the hoop. He's showing a lot of confidence, which I think is good because I don't think he was showing that at the beginning of the year. The issue is he's taking a number of bad shots because he's so confident. Izzo was getting on him a number of times in the last few games, whether they be contested mid-range jumpers or whatever. But his confidence is up, and I think that's a good thing in the long run. But as you were saying.
Yeah, so, I think that that's helped. I think that getting Bryn Forbes more involved in the offense has been good as well. And, that's something that we've talked about going back to last year. It seems like when Bryn Forbes is involved on the offense, that the offense is better. Whether that's just him taking threes or he has been able to create a little bit more and use the threat of his three-pointer to drive into the lane a little bit. It seems good. And then being able to establish post offense to some degree, I think has been good as well. I think that has in some ways been part of the reason for an overall drop in assist percentage. So, fewer of MSU's baskets have come with assists, and I think a lot of that has to do with kind of dumping the ball into the post and going from there. So the good news about all of this, though, is that it seems to me that in a given matchup, MSU can do a number of different things. I mean,
Right.
they can go small and try to run the ball. They can go big and try to pound it in the post. They can shoot a lot of threes if teams are running zone. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that this team can go, partially because of the depth on the team. But it's, I mean, to me, that's very encouraging, and I hope that Denzel Valentine doesn't rush himself back too quickly, because to me it seems like the next two games are pretty winnable even without him. Penn State did play very well against Maryland last week, but it's yeah, I mean, to have him back for Penn State would be good, and then going into that Iowa game, that'll be good as well. I think that this MSU team has a very good shot at winning at least a share of the Big Ten title this year. And when this injury happened, pretty much couldn't have been better. They had the loss to Iowa, but that could have been a loss even with Denzel Valentine.
Right, and
anyway.
I was just going to say, Iowa followed that up by winning at Purdue. So,
right.
I mean, Iowa, they had a couple iffy losses early, and I mean, they were winning at Iowa State before blowing that game. That's a good team, and they've clearly shown that. And they're going to have more than a week of rest before they come into Breslin next week. And I think that's by then you want Denzel Valentine back, because that Iowa team is good, and they kind of handled you, a week ago. So
yeah. I mean, it'll just be good to see Denzel back. For one reason or another. I mean, at this point, this team has we're at BubbleCon 5, as Spartan Dan would say. There's basically no shot at not making the tournament. But wide open Big Ten schedules don't always come along like this one, and it's if you could steal a share of a Big Ten title this season, it would be awesome in what is supposed to be a transitional year again.
Yeah, so anything else you wanted to hit on?
No, I got my Tom Anastas take in, so that's all that matters, really.
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about that. So he needed a lot of time, because Rick Comley, he won the national championship, but he kind of drove the program into the ground by the end with the lack of recruiting. And Anastas has done a pretty good job of reestablishing those recruiting grounds, and in college hockey, it takes a number of years before you get those players to campus. So he's done that there. You had to give him some patience, but we're in year 5 now, and there is just very little, if any, progress in the product on the ice. My biggest takeaway, the NHL draft picks that they do have don't really seem to be getting any better. And Jeremy Dewar, our hockey guy at TOC, he phrased it as Anastas improved MSU's recruiting from a D+ to a B-. And to blow I think it was a 2-0 lead against Michigan Tech in the GLI third period, to blow a 1-0, I think it was a 1-0 lead against Northern in the third place game, and lose those games in overtime. Spartan Dan pointed out that based on some advanced metric, MSU is the 6th best team in the state. Behind, I'm assuming that's going to be Michigan, Michigan Tech, Northern, Western. Then there's also MSU, Ferris, and Lake State. I'm not quite sure what the order of that was, but I mean that says it all right there. I mean, you can say the recruiting's not great, but you're Michigan State. If Lake Superior State, if Michigan Tech, if Ferris State, if Northern Michigan, if these teams are better than you without nearly the amount of resources, that does not reflect well upon you. And then Anastas got an extension not long ago, so I'm very curious to see what happens here, because this hockey season appears to be basically all but lost. how they've done it, and they've got Michigan coming up, so may get worse. So see how it ends, but I can't imagine I don't think the state of the hockey program is very good right now, which is too bad because hockey's a fun sport, and they used to be MSU's arguably number 2 sport for a long time there when they would have the record sell at Drake and Munn. But program has fallen on hard times, certainly, and see where it goes. So, anything else?
No, that's all I got.
All right, guys. Not sure if we'll have one of these next week. I'm going to San Antonio for the coaches convention early in the week. I'm not quite sure if we'll be able to put one of these together or not. So yeah, either next week or the next. Thanks to everybody for listening. There may have been, I probably don't think there was intro music at the beginning of this. I know someone had mentioned intro music making it better. We record these late at night, and I want to get up by the next morning, and it's always we can already barely fit in the time to record it. So I know how to add the music, but between the time it would take, I wasn't sure how much it was worth it. Most of you seem to be like, man, I figured just get to the good stuff. So I may do it one day if you think you need it or not. I mean, let me know and let us know in the comments. And thanks for listening. Make sure you're following The Only Colors on Twitter at The Only Colors. I'm at Chris Vanini. Joe is at JOBIN, number 2 letter E. And always check out theonlycolors.com for a lot of great stuff. And we'll talk to you guys pretty soon. So thanks for listening. See you.
See you.